Hi, it's Mike DelSignore. In today's video, I'm going to talk about why your breath test results may not be accurate when you're charged for OUI in Massachusetts. So keep in mind, a breath test is an estimate of your blood alcohol. So Massachusetts law doesn't prohibit a breathalyzer from being over 0.08, but the law says it has to be a blood alcohol reading. So what happens is there's a conversion from breath to blood. And in that conversion, the breathalyzer is going to make certain scientific assumptions about you that don't necessarily apply to everyone. So a breath test is an indirect measurement. It's not an exact measurement. It's basically, the way I look at it is you could say it's an estimate of what your blood alcohol would be, but it's not a direct test of your blood. So there's some flaws. There's some reasons why a breath test may be inaccurate, and some of these don't apply to blood testing. So for example, with a breath test, you need to have a 15-minute waiting period, an observation period it's called. You might hear your lawyer, or if you're in court, you might hear it referred to as a Pierre motion. So this is what's called the 15-minute observation period. The officer must make sure you don't burp, regurgitate, or there's no contaminating event that may impact the accuracy of the test. Now, many offices don't comply with this. They don't believe it's important, and when this is on video, a lot of times you can see that the officer is really not watching or observing, so it can be a basis to have the breath test suppressed. That's just a fancy way of saying in court that they're not going to be able to use the breath test evidence because there's a problem with the results. There are other ways to get a breath test knocked out of evidence. The government's got to comply with the annual certification, the periodic testing, and then they got to get the results into evidence. So a breath test case is not something you should just automatically assume can't be won in court. There's some things you can do. You can fight the breath test, try to get it knocked out of evidence, make sure that all the proper procedures were complied with, and you can potentially still win the case. Recently, we had a case where someone had a 0.12 breathalyzer, came into evidence. The client was found not guilty because we argued that there was a disconnect between the breathalyzer test results and the observations. The client looked fine in the video. She appeared to do well in the field sobriety test. The officers, when they testified, they knew nothing about how the breath test worked. So I was able to argue that given that there was no evidence in how the breath test worked, the assumptions that were being made, you can't credit that beyond a reasonable doubt, and that was basically the only piece of evidence convicting somebody. In many cases, that will be the case, that the breath test is the only thing that is proving the case against your client or against my client if I'm the attorney on the case. So when you have a breath test case, keep in mind this is just the law requires the government to prove these cases beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest degree of certainty. So when you have an officer coming into court saying they know nothing about the test, they don't understand how the machine works, they can't give a judge or jury any information about what assumptions are made, errors, and they basically just say, I turned the machine on, it appeared to work, and I got a result. If that's the evidence against you, and in many cases that will be, some judges may find the person not guilty even if the test comes into evidence. So what I would suggest, if you're a lawyer watching this video, if you're charged with OUI and there's a breath test, consider fighting the case. I've won these cases. I've had breath tests come into evidence, clients found not guilty, gotten them excluded. A lot of different ways to win a case with a breath test. And one method is to take all the other evidence, the field sobriety test, and say, well, geez, you use this as evidence. You say that this is a reliable indicator whether someone's impaired. Well, it contradicts your breath test. So if it does, that can create a reasonable doubt, especially in a case where there's little other evidence linking impairment, your client being impaired, other than the breath test. If the field sobriety tests are not consistent with the breath test over 0.08, that can create reasonable doubt. If the driving's good, that's another inconsistency. You don't expect good driving if someone's impaired. Someone's polite, cooperative, respectful. So take all these things and say, well, geez, you add all these up. They say normally those show someone's impaired, but in this case they say, well, that doesn't matter, we got our test results. No one can explain how we got the results, but that must be enough. But beyond a reasonable doubt, Beyond a reasonable doubt means the highest degree of certainty in the matter of human affairs. It means an abiding conviction to a near moral certitude. And the reason murder cases take a long time is because they don't just present the DNA evidence and say, okay, that's it. They present witness after witness to explain the test, explain how the results are, to educate the jury. And you don't get that with breath testing. You just get, okay, there's a number, believe it. And I think if you're a lawyer, again, fight against that. If you're charged with OUI, make sure you have an attorney that isn't just going to lay down because it's a breath test. After 30 days, if you did take a breath test, it was over 0.08, you can get your full license back. So you can have your license back while your lawyer's fighting the case. However, if you lose the case, then there'll be an additional 45-day suspension. If you have questions about a breath test case, I fight these cases all the time. I help other lawyers. I talk to other lawyers, sometimes attend seminars myself and teach other lawyers these issues, how to attack a breath test. Feel free, call, text anytime, 781-686-5924. My passion